Hello and welcome to another episode of In Conversation with. This is a part of the Cassie New York Knowledge Series where we invite senior management practitioners from the industry to share with us the strategy and tactical approach towards different verticals and streams within the business. Usually we focus on sustainability, CSR, and a range of topics around that. Today we have a very interesting person who we are going to talk to. We have with us Sandhidip Puri, the Chief People Officer at Sapphire Foods. For those who are not aware of Sapphire Foods, it is one of the world's best companies with one of the best products. It is Pizza Hut and KFC. So let's have a candid conversation with Sandhidip Puri. Welcome to the show, Sandhidip.
Thanks, Dr. Presh. Thank you very much.
It was very nice of you to come on this in conversation with topic, and particularly after you have been to our roundtable conference. We got a lot of excellent reviews on the roundtable on your speech. So I will shortly be sharing those reviews with you. I'll be forwarding a few contacts also with you. A lot of people from your industry, HR industry, want to reach out to you and have a chat with you.
Absolutely.
That was amazing. I'm sure today's session will be as exciting. So tell me something. How I saw your growth chart in the industry. You were with an ad agency, Mudra, and then you were with a computer company, and then you were with consulting. So how did you shift to a company like Sapphire?
So that's a journey. I think my love with HR started almost 25 years back, Dr. Paresh. And when you fall in love with HR, industries don't really make a difference. You tend to look at things where you will probably challenge yourself, challenge your wits, challenge your courage, and challenge your determination. And I think I went through a lot of ups and downs. Started my career with a small organization that was basically called Turner Morrison, and it had multiple group companies. Lacoste was one at that point in time. There was STP, which was into a very different foray altogether. Moved on to manufacturing, 5 years of manufacturing. Manufacturing, I think, gave me love for people and love for wanting to make a difference in people's life, because the diaspora that you kind of reach out to through manufacturing sector is absolutely amazing. You go to the grassroots and the right set of people who are there willing to make a difference. And that's where I think I fell in love with getting to work with people who can make a difference. After manufacturing, I tried my hands at consulting good over 8 years. In fact, when I was with the technology organization also, I was with their consulting wing. So I was a consulting practitioner with them as well as with Deloitte. And after consulting, I think when I got really, academically also satisfied and challenged, because, consulting gives you a lot of expertise around how you can make, academic projects do wonders for organizations. I think that's when my love back for grassroots called me, and I moved into retail. I joined Aditya Birla Retail. When I left them, I was also looking after the OE portfolio for Madura and Pantaloons and Aditya Birla Retail. Then the next obvious choice becomes QSR, because it gradually becomes even more challenging. The space is extremely challenging. So I think I found my calling here to stay, hopefully a lot longer.
See, that was actually my next question. So, I'll ask it anyway. See, when you work for a company like a Deloitte, then the average salaries of people is pretty high. Everybody's in MBA, you're into consulting. And then when you move on to retail, or when you move on to a large format company, then the average salaries are low. People are not MBAs, and there are masses, so it's like the masses and the classes. So as an HR professional, what is the additional challenge that you face when you move from the classes, when everybody is an MBA to everybody is not an MBA, and you need they need additional support from HR. Yeah. So how when this transition happens in a HR person's life, what are the additional challenges that you face?
I think, at a very core level, we have to understand, and I believe so, Paresh, that human beings are all the same, irrespective of their educational qualification. Each and every individual, to the best of their capabilities, wants to deliver the best. And that has been my biggest learning with the manufacturing setups when I used to work with workmen at the shop floor level, to now when I work in retail, that when I go to even the security guard who mans our stores, will do his so best to make an impressionable difference to lives of people. And therefore, I did not find it challenging. However, what I did realize is that their aspirations and desires have to be curated. Their vision has to be curated. Unlike us who've been exposed to education and therefore our horizons are much broader, you have to work with these grassroots level masses to curate their vision. They may have, relatively, it's unfair to probably have a relative, ranking of aspirations and visions, because each one of us come from our respective perspectives. But I think to be able to curate them is a journey, which is what I learned in retail and both manufacturing, that they all want to do their best. They all want to grow. What they do not know is how to do it. So what you as an HR person bring to the table is that desire. Unless that desire is fueled, then whether it's a person who's absolutely a PhD or a DLit, or a person who's probably done his 10th, 12th, does not make a difference. So you have to ignite that desire for growth, learning, and development in our parlance. Sometimes they feel they're happily developed, but I think in more societal norms, you have to kind of ignite that aspiration in them, which is a journey that I have come to realize through retail and QSR.
One thing that you just mentioned, that people want to and people are keen to deliver to their fullest, and you just need to provide a structure. I'm personally very happy to know that that when we were studying, there are two theories: theory X and theory Y. One of them says that you need to beat people to make them perform, and the other says that people are trying to perform, and you just need to guide them. So there is a negative theory, and then there is a positive theory, which is a very very base. Somewhere we studied 20 years back. So I'm happy to know that someone in your shoes belongs to the other category, where she feels that people want to perform, people aspire to perform, and you just need to structure them. So that's a happy thought. Tell me something. When you were growing up, you were your parents had a transferable job, and you were in multiple cities. Did that help you in some way, or did that make you a people's person in some way? So many cities, small cities, big cities. Did it frame an opinion? Did your opinion got framed because of this travel?
Yes, I think I was always a very receptive child. What I learned from the environment was much, much more than what I learned from school, with all due respect to the schooling and the education that I've been through. But what I learned from my environment was absolutely amazing. And I think more you get exposed to multidimensional environment and conditions, more it augments your capabilities and your whole perspective towards things. So yes, I think travel, I won't say it made me a better people's person. I don't think so. I was always a very friendly child. But it definitely broadened my horizon of thinking, understanding of situations, people. I became very intuitive, to be able to gather a lot of data when you meet people and you are in multiple situations. I think the travel and exposure to multiple cultures helped me become extremely intuitive and understanding of situations and people equally. Paresh. Yep.
Mhm. Okay. See, before we move on to the core, CSR, sustainability, and those questions, I have one more question for you. So, you
Yes.
have been heading talent management.
Yes.
So, you are recruiting senior people. You are helping senior people perform to the fullest. You are guiding, hand-holding senior people from various verticals. Some of them may be senior to you, and
Yes.
it's a job to handhold them, guide them in the right directions. So, two questions really. One is, what do you see when you recruit people, when you are recruiting a CXO, a business head, everybody's CV is really the same. Everybody is an engineer, everybody has 15, 20 years of experience, everybody has handled $1 billion budget and thousands of people. So everybody's CV is really the same. So what are the top 2, 3 qualities that you look at in people? So that is question number one. I will come to question number two when you answer this.
Okay. So I think I'm a very finicky hirer, so to say. And last thing probably I judge is the technical capabilities at senior level, because it is assumed that if you've reached a position, you have a technical know-how to perform a function or a role to best of your possible capability and expectation.
Correct.
What I look for in people is passion. What I look for in people is courage. And what I look for in people is their desire to take things to closure. And these are not esoteric, nice to have words. The passion of a person comes through in the way the person talks. The detailing of which the person will talk to you, if he or she has passion, you can just simply filter it out absolutely well. You know, how you judge a person, whether he takes accountability of roles and jobs and functions that he or she performs, will come across in the way the results, even if the results are not positive, how well the person owns up those results will show you how accountable and desirable for closure that person, he or she is. So I think these are top 3 things that I look for in people, and they're very easy to gauge. At least for me, when I interact, I will come to know that a person does it, or he or she is faffing it out. It just reflects very well. And like I told you, I am relatively intuitive also. So I am able to gather a lot of data and put it together and form my opinions. More often than not, I'm quite right about it.
Oh, very well said. This is one of those rare interviews when the interviewer is getting interviewed. I'm taking your interview, and now I suddenly feel jittery when you are judging my passion. So,
Yeah, I am
to that.
taking, I tend to do that, but yeah, with all my intent in right place.
Yeah, so suddenly I got cramps. When I heard that, my stomach was rumbling, and I said, okay, now she is now she is interviewing me. So yeah,
No, so I must tell you, the first session, the round table that I had, in fact, one of our first conversations, I saw a huge amount of passion where in our conversation when, we conversed for the first time. I saw sheer passion for sustainability and CSR come through, and which is why I generally don't engage in something that is not directly linked to my purview. But this one, I really got drawn by sheer passion from your end than anything else. So yeah.
so I deserve a pat on the back. Thank you very much for that. So I'll come to my second question. Well, once you recruit people, and then operations is boring. So I have been a CEO. I am termed as a growth CEO by my colleagues and my bosses. So I usually get recruited in companies which have a 3-year, 5-year plan to double, triple, quadruple. I'm that kind of a guy. One very difficult thing is to sustain the energy level. We meet a lot of energetic people. We meet a lot of business heads. We recruit VPs, business heads, CEOs, branch heads, and they have very high energy level when we're talking to them for the 6 months, and then the energy level goes down because operations is boring. Somewhere it is there. So as a head of talent, how do you manage that? What do you see, or rather, what do you train your senior people in to make sure that the talent increases day by day, the cutting edge talent increases day by day, and to their energy level remains high? So that's really an HR perspective. So what do you do? How do you do that?
So I think retail doesn't allow for that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
retail and QSR do not allow for complacency to set in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll go back a little. When I was not in such a senior position, I'll talk when I was only looking at talent, I'll talk about that. But let me give you a retail perspective that in retail QSR, you cannot, especially QSR, you cannot afford your guards to be down. You have to be continuously fueled to be able to deliver. See, if I am hungry and instead of a KFC, I decide to walk into a competitor, I've lost that sale,
Correct.
right? I'm not going to be hungry twice for the same meal, right? For lunch on 2nd October, I will only eat one lunch on 2nd October. It's not that I'll enter a KFC and also a McDonald's at the same point in time. Therefore, if my teams are unable to pull customers in for one lunch, I think that's an opportunity miss. And that you can call it fear or you can call it passion to continue to attract consumers to your folds is what drives a QSR industry. So it just doesn't die off. Trust me, the frenzy that with which we work both in the stores and in the back end, because your back end chain also have to supplement that frenzy that they experience in the store. So there is a continuous flow of energy that does not get eroded. That is one. Two, what happens is that when you do not have right set of people in, they block the energies. And that is what, as a talent person, I have to ensure that there are no blockers in the system. And you have to keep your eyes and ears to the ground to understand where the energy is getting blocked. Because the system cannot afford an energy block. And therefore, trying to establish where the energy block always happens with people. A process will block your energy and you'll resolve it the moment you know process is an issue. What happens is that people end up blocking energies and you have to continue to pick up people and a simple conversation. If you've got the right person, if you've got the wrong person, then you'll have to change. There's no other way. But if you have the right person, like you said, the energy drips. When their energy drips, they clog the energy flow of the organization. All you need to do is pick up a phone, talk to them, send them another challenge, give them one direction. And there is no one solve for it. Every situation and every person will want a different impetus for them to be able to unblock the organization energy. So that's what we do. And we do it to the grassroots level because, a guy who has to pick up cash and organize a pickup of cash from the store to a particular location has to be equally energized, because we cannot expect a delay even in that transaction. There are actually at what hour, what minute, what second was cash picked up has to be kind of codified for us. So we just have to keep on talking and communicating and telling people how it's important. And I think it hits the nail home.
Correct. So you're saying it's
More
a
often than
constant
not, it
process.
works.
You cannot let your guard down for a minute.
Yes.
Absolutely. So then it's a tough job. It's a tough job being there. I'm sure you need a lot of.
It is.
Yeah, it's a tough job. So tell me, how important is diversity and inclusion in retail or in general? Your choice. You pick up.
So I think diversity and inclusion is absolutely essential, because and there is a lot of statistics. I'll not rumble statistics with you as to why it's important. We know if you have a diverse and an inclusive workforce mindsets, it actually starts reflecting in your top line, bottom line, wherever you want to make an impact, you're able to build it. But if I were to look at all practicalities, and if I were to, share with you a very common, without getting stuck in diversity and inclusion, I would say the sheer reason of having men, women, men, women from different parts of the country, different parts of society, working together for a common cause, and especially a common cause like ours that reaches to billions of users, right? I have got KFC and Pizza Hut put together, they'll have billions of users across the globe. So when I have a product that reaches to such masses, if I don't have inflow of information of what can attract those masses, I think I'm missing a big chunk of my top line itself. From there itself, I am, evaporating my top line. And therefore, it makes business sense for me to have diverse workforce, diverse mindsets, and diverse, atmosphere. And not just diversity, I think their inclusion, I think, is quintessential. If we are not including, you may have diverse set of people working with you, but if you're not including them at right sets of time and at each level of decision making, relevant level, I'm not saying that have diversity because you want to have diversity, but right level of decision making has to be diverse, and that's what makes it inclusive, right? And that is something that, with my eyes closed, hands on my heart, would say really works wonders for organizations. It's just, it is a non-negotiable.
Yeah, good to see that a company like KFC, Sapphire, is promoting diversity. We really need that as a world. Even as a country, India needs to enforce diversity and inclusion. Only then we can
Yes.
really grow or compete with the Europeans or the Americans. So tell me, I
Yes.
understand that food is a focus. Food is a focus within the CSR sector at your company. So is this a global
Yes.
focus or is it an Indian focus? And what really
It is a
happens
global
when food is
focus.
a focus? Okay. And what
So,
really happens? So what?
what we do is that, we've got a mission called Ad Hope. Now, Ad Hope caters to hunger management in India. It caters to, across the world also, it caters to hunger management. But in India, it caters to hunger management of underprivileged children. So what we do is we've got multiple tie-ups, and the collection that we make at the store level and also contributions that we make from the non-store levels are collected and shared with multiple partner associations who are working purely on hunger management for underprivileged children. So we keep it very simple. We realize that so the whole identification of partner organizations, I think, is the critical piece here. Once that is done, whatever you're collecting and you're sharing with them goes into right hands. So that process of tie-ups was something that was very critical. Now it is more of an automated process where we say that, okay, this corpus that is collected through our sales, our consumers as well as employees, goes to this entire kitty of Ad Hope, which is given to partner organizations who in turn manage the hunger across the country for underprivileged children.
See, apart from hunger management, I'm sure your company is also subject to a lot of environment norms.
Yes.
Social is one aspect, but if you look at ESG, there are a lot of environment norms and governance norms. Now, a large company
Yes.
like yours, I'm sure you have a lot of things, a lot of policies and processes to ensure governance, right?
Yes.
So, and social, I'm sure you're doing a lot of good with this hunger initiative. Do you have a lot of policies or people in place for the environment side also?
So I think what happens with QSR organizations, operations, that we are governed by relatively stringent, much stringent laws than any other retail organization. More because we've got a food effluent that is released from our stores. There is, the waste also is a lot of food waste that is released from our stores. So there is a process. In fact, there are stores that actually have ETPs within the store premises to ensure that the effluent is treated and then released to the outside environment. So we are extremely stringent in terms of how and what we use in terms of managing the environment. That is one. Second is, a lot of it has come about as a journey. It has not been something that was there from day one. This is something that we've learned, become conscious, and we've started adopting. And I would say the processes of that adoption is still on. We're just relentlessly bettering our efforts to become much more environment conscious. So this is one. The second piece is, there are a lot of consumables within the store that are, for example, electricity. We use a lot of electricity. We use a lot of fuel. So the whole consumption pattern is something that we are extremely, extremely aware of. That how much and what and in what quality and quantity do we consume to be as best possible, be comfortable on the environment and also the organization. I think we have an equal say in terms of making an impact both on the environment and on the. So what happens? Let me give you a backdrop. When you're consuming, you're adding something to the environment, a pressure on the environment, and you're also adding pressure on your expenses, right? So if I consume more electricity, not only am I pressurizing the environment, but I'm also pressurizing my expenses. And therefore, and which is what I had talked in the roundtable also, that it has to be closer to my operation to be able to make a meaningful difference. And therefore, I know that if I do not manage electricity well, the teams are acutely aware that it is going to increase my cost of semi-variable. And by force, if at a strategic level, we know that it is impacting environment, and that is why we've taken up the project. But how we cascade it to reach the masses that work for us is to convert it for them in their own parlance. So your cost of semi-variables has to be optimized as best possible. And then to them, there is a slow, I won't say poisoning, but it is a slow infusion of thought that you have to conserve energy. But that comes to them late. That comes to them as part of the journey when they stay with us for a year or two. They realize that when I spend less electricity, I'm actually consuming less energy and therefore impacting the environment a little better, right? But how do we institutionalize is that you've got three parameters, of which cost of semi-variable is something that you have to work on reduction. And to them we incentivize. So lesser you spend, or lesser would be wrong, but more optimally you spend, better are your chances of growth within the organization. Better do we recognize your efforts that you bring to the table. So it's a pull, and push does not work. And I've come to realize that push system in our society does not work unless it's penalized. I'm being very probably not
Brutally
palatable
honest.
here.
Brutally honest about it.
Yes, but if you want something adapted and adhered to, you have to start penalizing. There has to be a consequence management. Now, if that doesn't work, you should have a damn good incentivization. So instead of consequence management where we penalize people, we incentivize them to look at things that are closer to the impact that they can make. And that's how we've kind of worked around our teams to sensitize them to the whole concept of consumption of energy and resources that are available in store, because that is what they can work upon immediately. And then we say, okay, go back home, tell them. So there's a lot of connection between work and home at our organization. But then that's a journey that doesn't come on day one. That is a long drawn process. So that then, thankfully, there are a lot of government mandates that have now helped us move away from plastic across board. The deviation from, so it was not something that came to us genuinely, it was forced. But I think once it got forced, we adapted rather well. And then we make the system realize, because what happens is when you are throwing away a full inventory of plastic glasses and plastic lids, it's a cost to the stores, and they always look at it from a cost lens. So how do you incentivize them, saying that don't worry, don't use it? Their intention is we'll use it, expend it, and then move on from there. And then, because it's an additional cost, right? So you say, okay, you don't have to worry about it. We will absorb it. You don't worry. You use something that is right for self, for consumers, and also is in alignment with the whole government mandate and mission that they have embarked upon. So multi-pronged strategy, nothing singular that works. You have to impact it in all ways, Dr. Paresh.
No, that something that you said back there was pretty amazing. And it kind of reiterates our philosophy at CASI. I'll tell you a little bit about CASI. See, we are the world's largest platform for CSR, sustainability, and volunteering. And we started in New York. Now we are present in 52 countries. We have over 3 million volunteers in India, and we work with more than 400 companies in India alone. So we work with hundreds of universities and thousands of corporates across the world. And CASI is an apex body, so we try to promote ESG, or that companies should follow ESG with a dual thing. And exactly what you just said, that one, you comply with the norms, you help the environment, and two, at the same time, it helps you in the bottom line. So that was very nicely explained by you. And I can tell you from my experience that hundreds of companies, even large companies, miss this point. That ESG as a norm is not a cost. If you turn it the other way around, you comply, you help the world, you help the country, and at the same time, it helps in your bottom line. So that effort of you, your team, and your company is excellent. We are really proud of you. Because that is something that we preach, and that is something that we expect every company to understand, that finally it will add to your bottom line. And that is superb. It's kudos to your team. It's an excellent job done. So tell me about employee volunteering. See, we promote volunteering, and we did not start that from New York. We started that from India, and it was more by default and less by design. We were not planning or trying to be the world's largest volunteering platform, but we became the world's largest platform with a reach of over 3 million, volunteers. So suddenly we find ourselves lending our volunteers to the government, to Pollution Control Board. We work with PWD, we work with MMVD, we work with Tribal, we work with a lot of departments, and we lend our volunteers to promote the causes, to help the government disseminate information on all these causes. And that really helps, because our volunteers are youth, students, and they have a lot of high energy. So if I go around disseminating information, I can talk to 20 people. These guys, they talk to 200 people, and they are still not tired at the end of the day. So we do a lot of work, and somewhere we feel that companies should motivate the employees to go and volunteer for various causes, and then it becomes one whole world where everybody is tuned to volunteering for any cause. So what are your thoughts on volunteering? Do you have a program?
Yes, we don't have a structured program. Should be honest with you. We do not have a structured program. But every year, in fact, twice every year, we have all our store teams, our 8,000 people across the country, at their different intervals. They've got their own calendars, and volunteering is one critical part, we call it an employee value proposition. Volunteering is a critical part of their calendar. And each of the store employees will go and work around on different things. Some of them, and it's absolutely choice of the store rather than we imposing our thought process, because there is one direction in hunger management that we centrally take care of. Uh, Beyond that, there are people who want to do more, but because they're all confined in office spaces and don't have the time, they don't get to kind of do what they aspire. And therefore each store, each region has its own programs that they run. So they could be plantation drives that these people do, and all of it is around the same community. So if you have a store in Kharghar, then the store teams will do that community engagement within that area. See, finally, you have to be associated with the community around you. So while you're doing a goodwill gesture at large, at a very topical level, where you're helping environment, where you're helping in hunger management, people want to feel good about doing something good in their communities that they can see, look, and feel. So our stores pick up their own drives and passions of visiting elderly, and it's a spread of things. There is no one thing that we do. We have teaching drives, so our people go to schools, and you have those footpath schools that are organized by government, so they
Correct.
go
Correct.
and teach there. They go to elder care houses. Then they go to children's home. They go to for plantation drives, cleanliness drives. I think a couple of weeks back we had a railway station drive, when people
Okay.
were getting back into the railways, because of the safety hole. After a lockdown, people kind of got back to trains,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So that
Correct.
piece. So they find their own opportune right things at right point in time, and they expend their time and energy and resources there. And this all comes out of a work day. So it doesn't go from their week offs. It comes out of a work day. So half a day, full day, depending on how they've calendarized it. That flexibility is there. But they do, the only mandate is that it should be done in the community around them, rather than going some far off place and making that difference. So that's how we do the
Okay.
volunteering, but it is not structured.
Yeah, but it is cool because if you have 7,000, 8,000 people, and a policy that yes, they can do volunteering. You're encouraging volunteering. I think that's very cool. People are good. People are good. I am surrounded personally by 3 million good people in a period of
Nice.
3 years. So I don't have a choice but to say that people are good. They want to do something. All I did was start a platform and told them, okay, let's do some volunteering, and I got
Correct.
3 million of them. So you are on the right path. I'm sure employees are doing a lot of good. With that, we come to nearly the end of this seminar. I have just a question for you, but before that, I will ask you a personal question, and you may
Yes.
choose not to answer the question. Yes, so the choice is yours.
But
Now,
I should
everybody
be
has a
able to
favorite
answer.
pizza.
Sorry?
So the question is, everybody has a favorite pizza. Yeah, so do I. So, which pizza out of your stores is your favorite?
That's a difficult one. All vegetarian pizzas are my favorite. I won't choose one over the other. I couldn't possibly choose. And in fact, since I'm a vegetarian, I end up having, so I kind of alternate. So one day I'll have one, the other time I'll have another. And also I don't miss out on a veg zinger in KFC. So yeah, I'm a big time fan of all our
I'll
veggie products. No
okay.
choices here.
I'll tell you my favorite. It's only fair.
Yes, yes.
So I like the one with the chicken overload. Where they add lots of chickens.
Uh,
So that one is my
Tikka,
favorite, and the veg delight where they add everything in veg.
yeah,
The large ones. So
yeah.
I'm trying to manage my weight, or rather, my family is trying to manage my weight. So
So,
So I
I've
don't.
learned the trick. I have learned the trick of weight management while being surrounded with such delicious food. You skip all the other meals for that day. So you
Yeah,
have
yeah,
just
I do
one
that.
meal and skip everything else, and then you're sorted.
No, no, we have all our birthdays at KFCs and Pizza Huts.
Oh,
So
awesome. Yes.
yeah, one complaint. Let me put this officially. I stay in Mulund. I
Okay.
stay in Mulund in Mumbai, and you guys started KFC, but then the franchisee got shut down, and now there is no KFC here. So I have to travel 6 to 8 kilometers to go to a KFC in Thane.
Ah, yes.
I'm a big lover of KFC.
You actually personal message me. I will ensure it's home delivered, warm and nice.
We'll do that. We'll do that. So I'll ask you the final question. See, we
Yes.
have thousands of students. We have 1 million plus students at CASI,
Hmm.
and we have thousands and thousands of students who are into HR. So
Hmm.
they are doing their graduation in human resources or PG in human resources, or various facets under human resources.
Hmm.
And they would love to hear this interview, and they look up to you. You are a very senior person. You are a very senior person in the human resource arena. So I would like you to leave a few words for them, to all
Hmm.
my HR students, and there are thousands and thousands of them across this country and other countries. So a few words to them on how they should work in their career, how they should search for a job, what should be they be looking at, what capabilities should they develop, would be very nice.
I think this is one of my favorite questions when I address students. I've got two kids, so I keep on telling them this also all the time, that as a student, all you have to do is study, do work around your studies, eat and play. These are the three things, nothing else that when you're studying is expected out of you. So you spend your time wisely between studying, playing and work related to your studies. Do not while away your time into multiple things, especially senior students like yours. I think the focus should be very clear to do a lot of concurrent projects with organizations. There are many organizations that are keen on giving young passionate kids concurrent projects. So whatever you study at your college and school, go back and try and find a project around it. All you have to tell the fraternity is that I'm available, and there will be someone willing to pick you up and give you a nice project. That is one. Two, I think drop the guards of I want to do only talent, or I only want to do recruitment, or I only want to do operations. Trust me, till you've done everything, you don't really know what you want to do. I mean, I've learned it in a very haphazard way. I've had a very uh, different kind of a journey where I started with the specialist, then moved to generalist, then again to specialist, then again to generalist. And my love for even operations is as much as my love for probably diversity and inclusion and more so-called esoteric things. So don't be stuck on wanting to do talent or wanting to do training or wanting to do. Be open, experimental, and willing to do everything under the sun. Your passion in your work shows. So be passionate about it. And from that, I mean, when you pick up something to do, try and get into the skin of that project or work that you're doing uh, to the core. And that actually is true for even when I sweep and mop at home during lockdown. I'm sure all of us has done that enough and more. When I was mopping and brooming, it was almost like whitewashing the house, my husband got tired of me, my family got tired of me, but just the sheer passion and the fun even in mopping and brooming, because that was finally the call of the hour, right? That was needed out of all of us. We couldn't have left our homes unattended. Therefore, be passionate about everything you do, get into the details and go in for it. That passion will take you so far that I learned it rather late in life, but now I'm a big believer that the passion takes you miles apart from non-passionate people.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
that's pretty much it.
Thank you very much for those words. I'm sure our students will learn a lot from you, and they kind of look up to you because you're a chief people's person at a very, very large company. So thank you very much. With that, we come to the end. Thank you very much for being here. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you again. Thank you.
Same here. Pleasure was all mine. Thank you. I hope the students make best use of it.
Thank you. Mitesh.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Have